Today's story is not just about a flag, but about principles, determination, and freedoms that we should never give up. It is the journey of a man who dares to stand up for what is right, not bowing to unreasonable impositions. Join me in this meaningful story and discover the lesson of determination, pride, and the value of freedom. Don't forget to like, share, or follow so you don't miss the next inspirational stories. I have lived in this neighborhood for more than 5 years. A peaceful place with tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and neighbors who greet each other every morning with friendly smiles. My house is on the corner, with a spacious front porch where I often sit and sip coffee in the morning, watching the sun rise over the identical roofs built to the residential standards. I'm not the type to be a meddlesome or attention seeker. I live up to my responsibilities as a homeowner. I pay my HOA dues on time, keep my yard neat, and never complain about the little things. Since my discharge from the military, I've lived a simple life, staying out of trouble. But everything changed when Karen showed up. Karen wasn't a stranger to the neighborhood. She had been a regular neighbor, only known for her nosy habits. Things only got worse when she became HOA president. I'm not sure why anyone chose Karen for this position. Maybe no one wanted the responsibility, or maybe she was the only one who cared too much about the petty rules. Whatever the reason, the peace of the neighborhood has never been the same since that day. As soon as she took office, Karen began sending out new notices to every house. Some of the rules made sense, like requiring people to keep their landscaping neat or not leave trash cans in front of their front doors for too long. But she quickly overstepped her bounds, imposing unreasonable rules like prohibiting children from playing outside after 8 o'clock at night, or requiring that all curtains in the neighborhood be a uniform color. To most residents, these changes were just a nuisance, but to me they felt like unnecessary control over the little details of my personal life. I didn't care whose curtains or what color my neighbor's lawn was, and I certainly didn't need someone dictating how I decorated my house. At first, I thought keeping quiet would keep me out of trouble, but with Karen, silence didn't mean peace. She not only sent out reminder letters, but she also personally inspected each house, noted violations, and sent out warnings. Many neighbors objected, but eventually accepted to avoid trouble. I didn't care until Karen targeted my house. The flag on my porch became the pretext for a fight I never wanted. Maybe I was in her sights because I was one of the few who never attended pointless HOA meetings. Or maybe because I didn't care as much about currying her favor as many others. But whatever the reason, Karen seemed determined to make me follow her rules. I started getting letters for ridiculous things. Once for parking my car too close to the sidewalk, another time for my trash can tipping over when the garbage man came to pick it up. I ignored these things, thinking they were nothing to worry about. I didn't realize how much of a pain I had become in Karen's side until one morning when I got my first letter about the flag. That's when I knew Karen had gone too far. I'd hung the American flag in front of my house since the day I moved to this neighborhood. It wasn't just a decoration. It had special meaning to me. As a veteran, I knew better than anyone what it meant. It reminded me of my service, of the men I'd lost, and of why I'd put my life on the line for my country. I hung it with pride, never thinking that someone would ever try to get me to take it down. But that's exactly what Karen wanted to do. My flag had not been an issue until Karen took over the HOA. Before then, no one in the neighborhood had ever complained about it, and some neighbors had even complimented it and said it made my house look nicer. But to Karen, it was a problem that needed to be addressed. Just a few days after I had ignored her previous unreasonable warnings, I received another letter from the HOA this time about the flag. The letter was longer than the previous ones, used stiff, bureaucratic language, and stated that my flag violated the neighborhood aesthetic code and needed to be removed or replaced with a smaller flag that met HOA standard. I read the letter not knowing whether to laugh or be angry. There had been no previous rules limiting the size of the flag. I knew because I had read the HOA's bylaws when I bought the house. It was clear that this was just another one of Karen's attempts to control everything she wanted. I had seen her do it to other neighbors, forcing them to change the color of their front doors, forcing them to move their potted plants because they affected the public view, but this time she had touched something she shouldn't have touched. I didn't respond to the letter, nor did I attempt to take down the flag. Instead, I continued my normal routine, standing on my porch every morning, sipping coffee, watching the flag flap in the wind. I knew Karen wouldn't stop, and as I expected, a few days later, another letter arrived, this time with a more forceful tone. The HOA stated that if I didn't comply, I would be fined under a recently added rule. Reading that, I almost burst out laughing. I don't know if Karen thought I was the type to cave in to meaningless administrative threats, but if she did, she was wrong. I'd been through worse in the military. A warning letter from the HOA was nothing compared to the long nights on the battlefield, nothing compared to the times I'd seen my comrades fall before my eyes. If Karen thought she could make me remove one of the most meaningful things in my life for a lifeless piece of paper, she had misjudged me. I put the letter in a drawer and went on with my life as if nothing had happened, but I knew Karen wasn't done. A few days later, she stood across the street, phone in hand, her eyes full of annoyance. I didn't need to hear to know she was calling 911, trying to turn my flag into a violation that needed to be dealt with. Karen didn't know who I was or what I had been through, but she was about to get her lesson. I stood on my porch watching the American flag flutter, a symbol of something much bigger than any HOA. The warnings didn't bother me because I knew my rights and would never bow down. I wasn't a confrontational person, but I also didn't accept unreasonable pressure. Before I reacted, I read the law. The Veterans Flag Protection Act states that HOAs cannot prohibit or restrict the display of the American flag by veterans. The law was on my side, and Karen's attempts to force me to remove the flag were futile. The HOA's warning letters were baseless threats, with no legal standing. I continued my daily activities, ignoring the increasing number of letters from the HOA. Every morning I held my cup of coffee and looked at the flag as an indispensable part of my life. I noticed the change. Some neighbors looked at me with questioning eyes, perhaps because of the rumors from Karen. But I didn't care. I didn't live to please anyone, and the values I held dear were not easily shaken. Karen didn't give up, sending letters with all sorts of reasons, from aesthetics to neighborhood regulations. I didn't need to read them to know what they said, but those words meant nothing to me. The flag was still there, as strong as my belief in what it represented. She tried even more subtle tactics. One day I received a notice that I would be fined if I did not comply. I was neither surprised nor concerned. If the HOA really wanted to pursue this issue, they would have to fight the law, and I was sure they would lose. This was not because I was stubborn, but because I knew I was right. I had fought to protect this country, to protect the very rights that Karen was now trying to infringe upon. Things escalated as Karen lost patience with her useless letters. She began showing up at my door more often staring at the flag with a look of annoyance. I didn't need to hear what she said to know that she was trying to pressure me. But it didn't work on me. On the contrary, every time I saw Karen upset, I felt more certain of my decision. One morning, as I was watering my plants, footsteps stopped across the street. Karen. She stood there for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and called 911. I didn't have to turn around to know she was trying to make the flag a big deal. I continued my work, ignoring the exasperation in her voice and the hyperbole she spewed. Karen could have made excuses about aesthetics or danger, but I wasn't in a hurry. I'd been preparing for this. 15 minutes later, as I put down my watering can, a patrol car drove quietly into the neighborhood. 2 officers got out, one younger and looking a little awkward, the other older and more experienced. I guess they realized from the start that this was not an emergency. Still, they walked to my front porch, glanced at the flag flapping in the wind, then turned to look at me with appraising eyes. I straightened, folded my arms across my chest, and waited to see what they would say. I didn't have to speak first, because just as they were about to speak, Karen rushed in as if she had found a savior. She had a stack of HOA documents in her hand, her tone barely concealing her annoyance. I couldn't help but smile slightly as I realized that she had actually printed out all the HOA clauses that she thought would help her win this fight. But I knew what she didn't know. She had picked the wrong person to confront. Karen talked a lot, pointing repeatedly at the flag as if it were some kind of illegal object. I stood still, saying nothing, letting her pour out her prepared words. I could see the eagerness in her eyes, as if she spoke loudly enough, often enough, the truth would tilt in her favor. The 2 officers listened patiently, but I noticed that the older one was starting to look impatient. Finally, when Karen paused to catch her breath, the older officer turned to me, his gaze calm but piercing. He looked me up and down, then back at the flag. I could see what he was thinking. A middle-aged man, sturdy in build, standing on a porch with an American flag flying, it was easy to guess who I was. But instead of asking, he cleared his throat gently, as if waiting for me to speak first. I didn't keep him waiting. I'm a veteran, I said simply, my voice firm, and I know my rights. I saw a flash of understanding in the officer's eyes. He nodded slightly, as if what I had said confirmed what he was thinking. The younger officer standing next to him raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised that this simple incident had been reported as an emergency. Karen froze, then flipped through the documents looking for a rebuttal clause, but she wouldn't find one. I knew the rules. No matter how hard she tried, the flag wasn't going anywhere. She wouldn't stop, even when the officer began to lose patience. For Karen, it wasn't about the flag, it was about power. Her stubbornness wasn't about being right, it was about not accepting defeat. She clutched the HOA documents tightly in her hands, flipping through them at a frantic pace, as if some magical clause would appear to help her win the war she'd started. The papers in her hands shook with pent-up anger, but I stood still, arms crossed, waiting. I wasn't in a hurry. After a moment of flipping through it, Karen thrust a piece of paper forward, almost directly into the officer's face. Her voice was steely, ringing with false confidence as she read off some provision she thought might apply. It stated that all exterior decorations must harmonize with the character of the neighborhood and not affect the general appearance. It was a vague provision with no specifics about the flag or its size, but Karen clung to it as if it were her last weapon. The older officer didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the paper, then slowly looked at me, then back up at the flag. A light breeze blew, causing it to flap high in the air, a silent but powerful statement. I could see the corners of his lips twitch, not quite a smile, but a small sign of recognition. Perhaps he had served in the military too, or perhaps he simply understood the meaning of this flag better than Karen ever could. Karen, not realizing that she had lost the moment, continued speaking, this time directly at me. Her voice no longer held the false patience. It had become sharper, carrying the irritation of someone accustomed to giving orders and expecting obedience. She repeated her HOA rules, her responsibilities as a good citizen, her upholding of neighborhood standards. But I didn't hear anything important in those words, because I knew what she was talking about wasn't about the neighborhood or the HOA. It was about her own ego. I kept my cool, not reacting hastily. I looked straight at Karen, letting her see that I was not afraid, not shaken. I did not need to yell or interrupt her. I just waited, because I knew that the law was on my side, and because I knew that the truth could not be twisted just because someone wanted it to suit their own preferences. The older police officer folded the document and handed it back to Karen in a calm but firm voice, putting an end to the argument. Karen clenched the paper, frustrated but unable to do anything more. She might be angry that she could not control me like the other residents, but I did not care. The truth could not be bent for power or personal gain. When Karen desperately sought a term against me, I knew it was time for her to know her boundaries. She stood there for a moment longer as if she still didn't want to admit defeat. But then, when she realized that no one was on her side, she turned and walked quickly home without saying another word. I didn't turn to look. I just looked up, watching my flag still fluttering in the blue sky, unshaken. And I knew that the war that Karen had deliberately started was over, but perhaps, for her, this was just the beginning. I didn't need to argue, nor did I need to raise my voice. Instead, I simply walked to the porch, opened the door, and took out a small box that I had kept for many years. Inside were some mementos from my time in the military, but what I needed right now was a photo. I thumbed through old papers, military insignia faded with time, until I found it. A picture of me with my unit, standing in front of a Humvee in the deserts of the Middle East. It was nothing special to anyone else, but to me, it represented a lifetime that few people could understand. I stepped out onto the porch, holding the photo in my hand, and held it out to Karen. She squinted at it, perhaps not immediately understanding what it meant. But I didn't give her time to be confused. I looked her straight in the eye and spoke, my voice calm but firm. I didn't need many words, just one thing to mention. The Veterans Flag Protection Act. I saw Karen's expression change immediately. She didn't say anything, but I knew she was trying to process the information in her head. I continued, keeping my voice even, reiterating that federal law protected veterans' rights to display the American flag without being restricted by unreasonable regulations from organizations like HOAs. No HOA provision was above state law, and if she continued to persist, she would not only have to face me, but the law. I didn't have to wait for her reaction to know that I had won. The older officer standing next to me gave a slight nod, as if to confirm what I had said. He didn't need to check the law, didn't need to flip through any documents. He knew I was right. The younger officer looked between Karen and me, seemingly trying to suppress a smile as he realized the whole situation had turned around. Karen looked at the photo in my hand again, as if she wanted to find a reason to argue, but she couldn't. She knew she had lost her last chance to exert power over me. She could control someone's curtains, she could force someone to change the color of their front door, but she couldn't do anything about this flag, and more importantly, she couldn't do anything about me. There was silence for a few seconds, and I savored every moment of it. I didn't need anyone to confirm that I was right. I just needed to see Karen unable to do anything but accept the reality. Then, as if she didn't want to waste another second, she turned and walked faster than usual, disappearing through the door across the street. I looked down at the photo in my hand, then back up at the flag flying high. It was still there, still strong, unshaken by anyone or anything. And I knew that no matter how many other Karens came into my life, I would never let them change what I believed in. The older cop nodded slowly after I mentioned the Veterans Flag Protection Act. He didn't need to double-check, didn't need to consult any documents. He knew I was right. The way he looked at me, the way he kept his eyes steady, told me that he understood not only the law, but the true meaning of the flag flying on my porch. Maybe he'd served in the military, or maybe he'd met people like me who had devoted their lives to protecting what Karen was trying to take away with the HOA's petty terms. Karen, standing next to me, had lost all of her usual confidence. She still held the document tightly in her hand, but I could see that it no longer held any power for her. The words in it, the terms she thought she could use to force me to do what she wanted, were now useless in the face of an undeniable truth. The law was on my side, and there was nothing she could do to change that. The older officer slowly turned to look at Karen, and when he spoke, his voice carried an undeniable certainty. He said that I had every right to fly the flag, that there was no HOA ordinance that would require me to take it down, and that Karen calling the police on something like this was a waste of law enforcement's time. I saw Karen's face harden, her lips purse, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had thought the police would come to her aid to help her enforce the HOA's authority over me, but it was the exact opposite. The silence stretched for a few seconds. The younger cop, who had been watching silently, raised an eyebrow at me, then glanced at Karen with barely concealed amusement. He must have realized all along that this was nothing serious, but he had kept quiet, waiting to see how things would develop. And now that it was all clear, I could see the corners of his lips twitch slightly, as if he were trying to suppress a smile. Karen opened her mouth as if to argue, but there was nothing to say. Every argument she had was defeated by the simple truth. I had done nothing wrong. The rules she had cited were simply the HOA's, and they were not above federal law. No matter what excuse she offered, no matter how much she tried to cling to, it didn't change the fact that she was wrong. I didn't need to say anything more. I just stood there, calmly folding my arms over my chest, waiting. I wanted Karen to feel the moment she realized she had lost. Maybe she was used to imposing her will on others, used to using the HOA's power as a shield to protect her control. But this time she had the wrong person. The older officer jerked his chin toward Karen, a clear sign that this conversation was over. No words were needed, the message was clear. Karen blinked a few times, looked down at the documents in her hands, then looked back up at me. There was anger in her eyes, but no longer the anger of someone in power, but of someone who had just realized she had lost control. The air froze for a moment. A light breeze blew by, stirring the flag on my porch. In that moment, I saw the disappointment flash across Karen's face, not just because she had lost, but because for the first time she understood that there were things that could not be imposed, that could not be controlled by unreasonable regulations. She clenched the document, turned and walked away, her high heels clicking on the pavement like an anger that could not be released. The policeman looked at her for a moment, then turned to me, nodding his head in understanding. Without saying it, I knew he understood that this was not just a small neighborhood dispute. It was an affirmation that the so-called rules were not always right, and that not everyone could easily submit to imposed orders. I took a slow breath, looking up at the flag still fluttering in the wind. I didn't need to do anything more. My silence was enough to prove it all. I stood still, watching Karen turn and walk quickly toward her house without another word. When her door closed, the older policeman turned to me, nodding slightly. I knew he respected me, and perhaps, on some level, he felt satisfied to see my steadfastness in the face of unreasonable control. The patrol car drove away, leaving me alone on the porch. I looked up at the flag that fluttered steadfastly like my own belief. No matter how many Karens appeared, I would stand firm, because this was not just a flag, but a symbol of sacrifice, pride, and freedom that no one could take away. The streets were quiet again, but this time there was no tension, only the echo of a victory, the victory of justice. I looked up at the American flag flying high in the clear blue sky. It was still there, proud as if it had never been threatened, as if no one had ever tried to take it down. The morning breeze made it flutter, a silent affirmation that freedom still existed, that determination still mattered, that some things could not be bent by unreasonable rules. I had stood under flags like this in battle, watched it flutter in the hot sands of foreign lands, bowed my head to it in memory of my fallen comrades, and I knew I would never let anyone, not Karen or anyone else, make me take it down for petty reasons. In the days that followed, Karen stopped showing up at my door. She didn't send any more warning letters, didn't try to force me to do her bidding with unreasonable terms. Maybe deep down she knew that nothing could change this outcome. Or maybe she just didn't want to face me again. Didn't want to put herself in a situation where she was sure to fail again. I didn't care why. All I knew was that from that day on, I was no longer bothered. My neighbors continued their lives as usual. Some had witnessed the whole thing from afar, but no one said anything or commented on it. Maybe they were used to the HOA's control and Karen's antics, or maybe they just didn't want to get involved. But I realized one thing. When I walked through the neighborhood, the eyes were different from before. Some people nodded slightly, some smiled slightly. No one said anything, but I knew they had witnessed everything. They saw me stand up for my rights, saw me not succumb to unreasonable impositions, and perhaps deep down they felt satisfied knowing that not everyone was easily controlled by HOA. Life gradually returned to normal. Every morning I still sipped coffee on the porch, watching the flag flutter in the wind, but now it was not only a national symbol, but also a reminder of the values I fought to protect. I saw in it the images of the soldiers I had fought alongside, the sacrifices that not everyone understood, the battles that took place not only on the battlefield, but also in everyday life. And most of all, I found myself steadfast, unshaken by anyone who would impose wrong. The flag was not just a piece of cloth waving in the wind, but the spirit of those who fought for freedom, and a reminder that freedom must always be defended, whether on the battlefield or on our own front porch. Karen may have thought she could impose her authority on everyone in the neighborhood, but she was wrong to think that applied to me. I had been through much harder than a few warning letters or empty threats. I had stood up to real challenges, fought real battles, and understood the value of steadfastness better than anyone. My flag is still there, and it will always be there. No one's stubbornness will change it. No one's rules will force it to go. It is a symbol of freedom, of patriotism, and of those who sacrifice to protect it. And I, even though I have left the military, will always protect it to the end. People like Karen will always exist, using their small power to impose their will on others. But the important thing is that we must not bow to injustice. If you have ever been forced to do wrong or felt isolated when defending what is right, remember that you are not alone. Stand firm, stand your ground. Sometimes protest without making noise. Just don't compromise what you believe in. Freedom is not given by chance. It is protected by those who dare to stand up. Don't let anyone take it away, not even a flag. Be steadfast. Be strong. Be proud of what you represent. Don't forget to take the time to leave your thoughts, comments, or contributions to help the story spread and become more meaningful. Don't forget to like, share, or click follow. Sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch.